This is Democracy Watch. Mark, I'm joined here by my dog. We have some new news out of the U.S. Supreme Court, news that all eyes are on as we head toward the next election. Can you explain what this Supreme Court case involves?
Yeah, first of all, for people who don't know, Brian loves this dog more than anything else. And so we all need to be praying for the dog. Okay.
That's right.
What's going on with the Supreme Court is it's going to hear a case that the Republican National Committee brought initially against the state of Mississippi to challenge that state's ballot receipt deadline. So Mississippi in 2020, shortly after I advocated that every state pass a law that says that if you mail your ballot, your mail-in ballot before Election Day, and it's postmarked for Election Day, and it arrives a few days late that after Election Day, that it should be counted. After I advocated that, Mississippi was one of the states that said, great, we're going to change our law and do that thing. And in fact, every Republican in the state voted for that law. It was not a controversial thing at the time. Well, what happened after that, we all know. Donald Trump went to war on mail-in voting. The Republican Party has gone to war against mail-in voting. And so the Republican National Committee sued Mississippi in January of 2024 to try to strike down this provision. And that is the case that is now going to go before the U.S. Supreme Court sometime this early next year.
Mark, how can the U.S. Supreme Court determine whether or not nationally mail-in voting would be allowed or disallowed, given the fact that it's up to the states to figure out how to run their elections?
Right. So what the Republicans argue is that under the so-called elections clause, which lets the states set the time, place, and manner of elections, that is subject to override by Congress. And so what they say is that the Uniform Election Day statute, the day that says that federal elections are on the Tuesday following the first Monday in November, that somehow needs to be read to say that you cannot accept ballots that are cast on or before Election Day, but are received a day or two late as a result of mail delays. Now, I don't think this has any merit. For people who are wondering, my law firm and I, we are in this case as defendants. We are actually defending the state of Mississippi's law. Not that I don't trust the good people of Mississippi, but when this lawsuit was filed in January, it seemed awfully suspicious that the Republican National Committee was using its resources to sue Mississippi in a presidential election year, since it's not really a battleground state. And, it seemed very likely that if all they wanted was Mississippi to change its law, Mississippi would be happy to oblige.
Yeah.
In fact, for a period of time, Mississippi looked like it was going to oblige by changing its law, and then all of a sudden stopped. Now, I'm not saying I can prove that there was collusion here between the state of Mississippi and the RNC. I have no idea, so I'm not saying that. I am saying that I am from the trust but verify camp. So my way of verifying is that my law firm and I represent intervener defendants in this case. We are in this case. We will defend this law tooth and nail, no matter what the state of Mississippi decides to do or not to do.
So it's worth asking here, this is going to the U.S. Supreme Court. Are you going to be arguing this case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court?
I may very well. This case was just taken. It will be set for argument probably, I suspect, in either late February or maybe in March. So it is possible that I will argue it on behalf of my clients. I certainly have a lot of interest in this issue.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about democracy docket on this series. I literally founded Democracy Docket with an article that was written about 4 things that states needed to do, what I call the 4 pillars to protect vote by mail. And one of those 4 pillars was ballot receipt deadlines. When I said that Mississippi actually took my suggestion and adopted a state law based on it, I wasn't being facetious. Like literally, I made this recommendation. I made 4 recommendations to every state on a nonpartisan, bipartisan basis, and a bunch of states picked them up. Some states picked up some of them, but not others. Other states we sued and we made them adopt them. And as we sit here now, dozens of states now have laws like the law in Mississippi that the Republican National Committee are trying to strike down nationwide.
I got a note for anybody who's watching right now. If there's any doubt about the extent to which Mark is fighting for us on the front lines where it matters most, we're talking about him arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, not even for the first time this cycle, but what would be for the second time this cycle. So a small step that we can all take is to support Democracy Docket, which he just mentioned. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video.
Yeah, one thing I want to add, you mentioned It's not the first time. I mean, there are three now, it appears, three major voting cases this term. The first is the Louisiana case involving the Voting Rights Act. And, you and I have talked a lot about the Calais case. That's a case that originated with my law firm, right? We challenged the Louisiana map because it was discriminating against black voters and their federal voting rights were being denied. We won that case in federal court. And as a result, black Louisianans elected two, not one candidate of choice in the 2024 election. It is the aftermath of that that led a group of white voters to now challenge that remedy in the U.S. Supreme Court. So we're very involved, obviously, with that case. The second case, which you alluded to, is a case I'm going to argue on December 9th. And that is a campaign finance case, not usually what you and I talk about, maybe not as front of mind as some other topics right now around democracy. But, it is a case, again, in which the Republican Party is the plaintiff, the National Senatorial Committee is the plaintiff. And I had to step in because the Department of Justice refused to defend the federal law. I mean, this is a federal law that had been challenged before, and the Department of Justice under both Democrats and Republicans had defended it, and now they wouldn't defend it. And now, finally, we mentioned this case, which is a straight up just vote by mail case.
Yeah.
And once again, I'm hoping that the state of Mississippi will defend their law, and I mean that in all sincerity. But we know one thing. I mean, Harmeet Dillon was tweeting on X earlier today that she's in favor of the RNC's position. So, the Department of Justice apparently has decided that it needs to weigh in on a question of Mississippi ballot receipt deadline law by supporting the Republican National Committee. So in the campaign finance case, Republican Party, in this case, Republican Party. And I think you and I know in the Calais case, which side the Republican Party is really on.
Yeah. Mark, on this case in particular, when we're talking about the prospect of restricting mail voting by putting a deadline in terms of the last day that mail can arrive, it obviously gives rise to some questions about how the USPS, if weaponized, could impact voters. And so, what if, for example, Donald Trump puts somebody atop the USPS, a la Louis DeJoy, and he decides a few days before Election Day to slow down the mail a little bit in Philadelphia or Detroit or Milwaukee or Atlanta, all of these population centers where that Democrats are largely going to vote because they live there, and where it's Democrats who largely make use of this vote by mail system. Doesn't this open up a situation where all you got to do is slow things down a little bit, and once it passes the deadline, then all of a sudden you've got ballots that are just disqualified? To what extent are you concerned about nefarious behavior like that?
Oh, I'm very worried about it. I mean, look, one of the reasons why I made this recommendation in 2020, in March of 2020, is because I did not trust Donald Trump controlling the U.S. Postal Service at that point.
Right.
I mean, if I didn't trust Donald Trump controlling the U.S. Postal Service in 2020, imagine what I think about him controlling the U.S. Postal Service today. Yeah. And before the people write in, and I get this all the time, and they're like, USPS is an independent agency, and, it has a board of governors, and, it isn't subject to blah, blah. Spare me. Okay, spare me. How many times have I been told that Donald Trump isn't going to affect something? Right. I mean, Donald Trump has been able to, directly or indirectly cause much stronger institution than the U.S. Postal Service to bow and scrape. Yeah. And so I worry about it a lot. And, when you read the lawsuit that the Republican National Committee filed against the state of Mississippi, they don't hide the ball. I mean, they say, and this is a direct quote, mail-in ballots from Democratic voters also tend to arrive late. Okay, answer this. Why do they tend to arrive late? They tend to arrive late because they are cast in places that have slower mail service. Now, you might say that's by accident. You might say it's on purpose. It's probably, frankly, a bit of both. But the truth is the Republicans know why they don't want this provision. They don't want this provision because, as they said, mail-in ballots from Democratic voters tend to arrive later. And that is why they are doing what they're doing. And if you don't think Donald Trump, if you don't think Republican governors, if you don't think Republican operatives and Republican election officials won't do something to make it a little bit harder so those ballots come a little bit later, maybe they mail them out to the voters a little later. Maybe, for example, they do away with some drop boxes. We've seen a lot of that. Maybe they don't allow mail service as easy access, or mail workers as easy access to their facilities. Maybe there's an ICE raid that week. Right. I mean, there's 1,000 ways that this can get delayed just a little bit with the U.S. military, with ICE, with all of these levers. And if you don't think that's possible, then frankly, you're just not paying attention. So we got to fight for this. We got to fight for this hard. We got to fight for it because we're right on the law. But we also have to fight for it because it is one of the pillars of our democracy.
Mark, I normally wouldn't ask you this if you may be arguing this in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, because I don't want to kind of give the game away. But because this case has already been argued in lower courts, I feel like it's a fair question. What is the principal argument against what the Republicans are trying to do here?
I mean, the principal argument is that states get to decide their own election laws. I mean, the Republican argument boils down to this. There's a federal law that says that Election Day is the Tuesday following the first Monday in November, period. That's essentially their entire argument. And under that rationale, they say you cannot have ballots that receive after Election Day be counted. Candidly, I don't quite know what to make of this because, of course, it doesn't change Election Day to say that mail-in ballots that are voted by Election Day should count. I mean, they presumably are fine that military ballots are able to be counted that come in after Election Day. And at least so far, they've not challenged early voting, which is when the ballots are cast before Election Day. So I don't make much of their argument. And in fairness to the Supreme Court, one rationale for why the Supreme Court might have taken this case is just because they want to reverse the Fifth Circuit, which is a very conservative circuit that ruled in favor of the Republican National Committee. And the Supreme Court may just want to end this insanity and put this to rest. I don't know. We're going to find out, but I know that I don't think the Republican Party has much to go on here.
Well, at a bare minimum, the fact that they took this case is good because had they not taken it, that would have been the law of the land in the Fifth Circuit. And so we needed the Supreme Court to have taken up this case if we want any hope of them being able to reverse it, at least in the Fifth Circuit. Of course, the flip side of that, which I know that you're going to say, is that they also have the ability to uphold it, and then it wouldn't just be precedent in the Fifth Circuit, it would be precedent across the country.
Yeah. So look, I think this may have been a miscalculation on the Republican Party. Like I said, I'm not going to accuse them of collusion where I don't know there was collusion. A cynic could say that it's convenient that they sued a state that they probably didn't care all that much about, where the state probably would have just changed the law if Donald Trump had called the governor. But instead they did this litigation in which on one side of the case, you had the Republican National Committee. On the other side of the case, you had the state of Mississippi. And so whichever way the Fifth Circuit came out, they would be in a position, one side or the other would be in a position to get it to the Supreme Court to try to set a national rule. Because the truth is, every other court, every other circuit, including the lower court in this case, has ruled the other way, right? The only court to ever hear this claim that has ever ruled this way is this one panel in the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah.
So it may be that they thought, look, we want to get this to the U.S. Supreme Court because we have bad circuit split. We have bad circuit law in other places where we care an awful lot more about this. So let's create a split out of the Fifth Circuit, then try to get to the Supreme Court and try to get a national rule. I don't know whether that was what they were trying to do or not. I know this. I know we're in the Supreme Court now, and the Supreme Court, if it does the right thing, can end this. And it has some important real-world collateral consequences that I want to make sure people are aware of. Right now, you have the Department of Justice sending letters to some states, including Ohio, citing this Fifth Circuit decision as a reason why those states need to change their laws. We have the President of the United States issuing executive orders claiming the Fifth Circuit is the rationale, the Fifth Circuit decision is the rationale for his authority to do what he's going to do. So the Supreme Court really has an opportunity here to close down not just this in the Fifth Circuit, but to really take out the legs from under the Pam Bondi fever dream that she is going to get this to be, adopted across the country.
Well, look, you are the one that's going to be ushering this thing through. So again, for anybody who's watching, to support Mark's invaluable work, not just in the media space where he is a desperately needed voice, but also in the courts where it matters most, on the front lines. A small step we can all take to show some support for his work is to sign up for Democracy Docket. That link is right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. And of course, to see more episodes of Democracy Watch, I'll put the link to this channel as well. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.